Welcome to Short Movie. Today's film begins with a businessman named Johnny, who is about 50 years old. Johnny is shown sitting with his friend, Dr. Dario, talking about his romantic adventures and multiple relationships. Dario seems very upset and tries to convince him to leave this lifestyle behind. He says, "You need to get married and settle down because you're not getting any younger." Suddenly, Johnny's phone rings, and he feels happy, thinking it might be his mother calling to make up with him after their issues over his lifestyle. Unfortunately, it's not her. Instead, he receives news that his mother has passed away. Johnny hangs up the call, deeply saddened, and informs Dario about his mother's death. A short while later, Johnny rushes to the cemetery to attend his mother's funeral. He sees a group of people heading to bury someone, so he follows them, assuming it's his mother's funeral. However, it turns out to be the funeral of a Filipino man. Johnny quickly runs to the correct location, where he finds his brother standing by their mother's casket. Johnny apologizes for being late, but his brother is upset with him due to his neglectful behavior. His brother hands him the keys to their family home. After the funeral, Johnny goes to the house and sits reminiscing about his memories there. He looks at family photos and sits in his mother's wheelchair. He notices her old radio, turns it on, and listens to a song. Suddenly, a young woman named Alicia enters the room. She introduces herself and offers to help, explaining that she's a volunteer who assists people with disabilities. She mentions she has been working at a nursing home for a long time and insists on helping him, believing he's disabled because he's sitting in the wheelchair. Although Johnny is completely fine, he doesn't correct her and chooses to stay silent. The next morning, Johnny is at his company, attending an important meeting with his employees. He angrily shouts at them because their sports shoe company is losing customers, and its name is on the verge of disappearing from the market. One of his employees, Julia, steps in and suggests a solution, targeting their products specifically to people with disabilities. Johnny mocks her idea, saying that people with disabilities rarely change their shoes because they don't move much. He then fires Julia, labeling her as a failure, and she leaves the meeting deeply upset. Later that day, Johnny returns to his mother's house, where he runs into Alicia again. He invites her over for coffee at his place, and they sit down to talk. Most of their conversation revolves around business people and the upper class. Alicia mentions that she has extensive connections with wealthy people. Before leaving, Alicia says she has to go, and Johnny feels the urge to confess that he's not disabled. But when she looks at him, he hesitates. Instead, Johnny tells her that he owns a large factory producing soft drinks, that he's wealthy, and that he has a villa and other properties. Hearing this, Alicia's attitude shifts, and she starts talking to him differently. She gives him her address and invites him to her countryside home for lunch, asking him to visit her there. Johnny thinks she's interested in him, and wants him to meet her family. On the day of the gathering, Johnny takes a bouquet of flowers and heads to Alicia's house in the countryside. However, he parks his car far away from the house, a considerable distance. Noticing that the sky is cloudy and rain seems imminent, he grabs his raincoat from the car and puts it on, preparing for the downpour. He then sits on his wheelchair and begins making his way toward Alicia's house. But Johnny finds it difficult to control the wheelchair and struggles to move it properly, causing him some discomfort along the way. When he finally reaches the house, he meets Alicia's family, consisting of her father, brother, and grandmother. After a while, Johnny notices a car pulling up in front of the house, and a stunningly beautiful girl steps out. The moment he sees her, he's mesmerized by her beauty. However, he's shocked when he sees her pulling out her wheelchair. The girl turns out to be Kiara, Alicia's sister. Johnny realizes that Alicia had arranged this meeting for him to get to know her sister Kiara. After lunch, Johnny and Kiara sit together alone, away from the others. Kiara begins talking to Johnny, sharing her likes and interests. However, the conversation feels incredibly dull to Johnny. He's uninterested in what she's saying and just wants to leave. The next day, Johnny returns to his company in Rome and meets his friends, including Dario. He tells them about what happened, describing Kiara as a very beautiful girl but expressing his discomfort with her disability. That same day, Alicia visits Johnny's house, which used to belong to his mother, carrying his raincoat to return it. However, she doesn't find him there but instead meets his brother. Alicia speaks highly of Johnny, describing him as a kind person who helps others and mentioning his many charitable activities. Johnny's brother is surprised by her words and confused about why she thinks Johnny has a disability. Alicia explains that she wants to help Johnny because he seems like someone with special needs but also admires how he manages to be self-reliant. At this moment, Johnny's brother realizes that Johnny has been lying to her. The following day, Johnny and his brother visit their mother's grave. His brother urges him to come clean with Alicia and stop lying, but Johnny ignores his advice and leaves. Later that day, Johnny contacts Kiara and asks her to go out with him on Saturday. The next day, Kiara surprises Johnny with a visit to his office. He's shocked and unprepared for her arrival, especially since he doesn't have the wheelchair he pretends to use. He quickly sits behind his desk, and when Kiara enters, she greets him and apologizes for not being able to go out with him on Saturday because she has a tennis tournament. She also invites him to come and watch her play. When the tournament day arrives, Johnny shows up to cheer for Kiara. She's thrilled to see him there. After the match, Kiara takes him out to lunch with her and her friends. During lunch, Johnny tries to blend in, engaging in conversation to appear as if he's part of the group. Later, Johnny travels to the city of Turin, where he coincidentally discovers that Kiara is performing at a concert. He quickly gets hold of a wheelchair and enters the theater. He's deeply impressed by her performance. After the concert, Kiara meets Johnny and asks him why he's in Turin. He fabricates a story, claiming he had work nearby and happened to stop by the concert hall by chance. The two go out to dinner together at a restaurant. Johnny decides it's time to tell her the truth and stop lying, but he hesitates at the last moment and can't bring himself to confess. Suddenly, Johnny accidentally presses a button on the wheelchair he's sitting in without knowing what it does, causing juice to spill all over the table. Kiara smiles and tries to lighten the mood, continuing their conversation with ease. That evening, Johnny and Kiara have dinner together, and then head back to the hotel where Kiara is staying during her few days in Turin. A few days later, Johnny returns to Rome and meets his friend, Dr. Dario. During their conversation, Johnny asks Dario about the differences between people with disabilities and others so that he can better understand Kiara and treat her well. However, Dario is not happy with Johnny's behavior and advises him to either change his lifestyle and tell Kiara the truth or stay away from her entirely. As usual, Johnny ignores his advice. That same day, Johnny contacts a friend of his named Disha, and the two go out at night. On the other hand, Kiara is sitting and talking with Alicia, telling her how happy she is in her relationship with Johnny. She also says that she loves him deeply and is thrilled that he treats her like any other girl without making her feel like something is missing. The next evening, Kiara visits Johnny at his new house, not his mother's place. She wears an elegant red dress and looks stunningly beautiful. When she enters the house, she is amazed by its beauty and starts wandering around to explore it. After a while, the two sit down for dinner. During the meal, Kiara asks Johnny about the reason behind his condition. He tells her it was due to an accident, similar to the one actor Christopher Reeve had. Kiara, however, is surprised and points out that Christopher's injury was in his neck, not his leg. Johnny becomes nervous but quickly recovers, explaining that he had a severe fall, which caused his disability. Kiara then shares her story, revealing that her condition resulted from an old accident that left her unable to move like normal people or do things the way she used to. Days pass, and Johnny is at home with one of his friends. She accidentally breaks a glass and says she's not disabled to do something like that. When Johnny hears this, he immediately asks her to take her things and leave. She is confused, as she believes she didn't say anything wrong. A period goes by without Johnny or Kiara reaching out to each other, as they are both busy with their lives. Johnny is shown at his company, instructing his secretary to implement suggestions made by an employee during a previous meeting to enhance marketing strategies and target paralyzed clients. Yet, Johnny can't stop thinking about Kiara. One day, Johnny decides to visit Chiara. When she opens the door, she tells him she is practicing her music and asks him to wait until she finishes so they can talk. Johnny sits on his wheelchair behind her, thinking deeply about telling her the truth. He finally decides to stand up and confess, but at the last moment, his courage fails him. He quickly sits back down before Chiara turns around. After finishing her practice, Chiara turns to Johnny and tells him she's happy to see him using the wheelchair more confidently without causing any trouble. She asks if he has something to tell her, but he denies it. She then shares that she used to love someone in the past who loved her deeply, but after her accident, he left her and never asked about her again. She also mentions that she hates lies more than anything in the world. Johnny becomes even more hesitant to tell Chiara the truth, complicating his dilemma further. Meanwhile, Chiara asks Johnny to introduce her to his friends. He agrees and tells her he'll arrange a meeting with them soon. That evening, Johnny meets Dario and Luciana, his girlfriend and his secretary, and tells them everything that happened. He asks for their help urgently, and even agrees to the dinner invitation so he doesn't look bad in front of her. Dario gets furious, telling Johnny that he's the one who will reveal the truth to her, and he won't let him keep lying. Dario gives him a deadline to come clean and tell her everything. The next day, Johnny invites Chiara and his friends over for dinner so she can meet them as she requested. During dinner, a bowl of soup spills on Johnny, and Dario steps in to help him clean up in the restroom. While in the bathroom, Dario repeats his warning, urging Johnny to tell her the truth and end this charade because the longer it drags on, the worse it will get. Suddenly, an employee from the restaurant walks in, and Johnny quickly pretends to be paralyzed. The following morning, Johnny's brother visits Alicia at her place. She's living in her own apartment next to their mother's, and brings her flowers as a gift. He tells her that Johnny has been lying and isn't paralyzed at all. Alicia is shocked and struggles to understand why someone would do something so absurd. As soon as she finds out, she confronts Johnny where he's hanging out with his friends. She slaps him in front of everyone and scolds him, giving him 2 days to tell Chiara everything he's hiding from her. She warns him that if he doesn't come clean within the deadline, she will tell Chiara herself, then storms off. That night, Johnny meets his father at a bar and explains his problem, asking for advice. His father tells him to tell Chiara the truth and not hide anything from her so she won't hate him. He also advises Johnny not to follow his example of juggling multiple relationships, which ruined his own life. However, Johnny is scared of losing Chiara if he admits the truth, fearing she'll leave him and never speak to him again. This thought alone causes him immense stress. Later, the event organizers at the venue announce a trip to France to visit a sacred site believed to have healing waters that cure all physical ailments. Hearing this, Johnny and his father come up with a plan. Johnny will take Chiara on the trip, pretend to be miraculously healed by the waters, and win back her trust. Meanwhile, Alicia talks to Chiara about Johnny. When Johnny calls Chiara to invite her on the trip, she agrees, leaving Alicia upset. Alicia tells Chiara she shouldn't have agreed, but Chiara surprises her by revealing that she already knows the truth. She knows Johnny is lying about being paralyzed, yet she says he's the only one who's ever made her feel loved despite her circumstances. She admits she's happy with him, even if he's lying, though she's unsure what the future holds. Alicia, upset by all of this, packs her things for the trip. The next morning, they all travel to France and arrive at the church by bus. Coincidentally, the priest at the church is Italian and knows Johnny. When he sees Johnny in a wheelchair, he calls him inside the cathedral to talk. The priest confronts Johnny, saying he knows he isn't paralyzed and asks him not to participate in the charade or pretend he was healed by a divine miracle. Doing so would give false hope to people who believe in such miracles, which is not true. After leaving the priest, Johnny sees Chiara wheeling her chair toward the road, just as a large car is about to hit her. In a split second, Johnny jumps out of his wheelchair and runs to save her, pulling her out of harm's way. When Chiara sees him standing on his feet, she's shocked and says it must be a miracle that he's able to walk after being paralyzed. Then, she leaves him and gets on the bus to return to Italy. Devastated, Johnny returns to Rome and struggles to move on from Chiara. He feels his life falling apart. A few days later, Johnny's friend discovers that his wife had been visiting Johnny's house behind his back. Furious, the friend confronts Johnny, unable to believe he would betray him like that. Meanwhile, Luciana, Johnny's secretary, resigns from her job because she can no longer work with him. Afterward, Johnny decides to rehire Julia, an employee he had previously fired, allowing her to implement her marketing strategies. He then visits his mother's grave and apologizes for neglecting her. That same day, he goes to Chiara's house and talks to her grandmother. He confesses everything that happened and expresses his desire to marry Chiara and spend the rest of his life with her. Holding a vase in frustration, he accidentally breaks it, which makes her grandmother smile, realizing he truly loves Chiara. Before he leaves, she advises him never to lie to Chiara again, as that's what angers her the most. Johnny then drives off, searching for the bus Chiara is on. He cuts it off on the road and gets on to talk to her. However, Chiara refuses to listen and tells him she doesn't need anyone's pity. She asks the driver to continue the journey. Hurt, Johnny returns to Rome. One morning, while jogging as usual, Johnny feels tired and sits down to rest. He notices a wheelchair nearby and looks up to see Chiara. Overjoyed, he hears her say she has forgiven him. In the end, we see Johnny and his brother celebrating Johnny's birthday with Chiara's family. Johnny picks up Chiara and dances with her, making everyone around them happy. And that's the end of our movie for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends.